You think modern life is tough? Imagine waking up in a frozen wooden house, your breath visible in the air, knowing the entire family's survival depends on you and you alone. No electricity, no hot showers, no backup plan. Just you, bare hands. In a world that doesn't forgive weakness. Now picture this. Your husband has vanished across the sea on a raid, and you're left behind. But you're not just waiting, you're leading. You're feeding, protecting, and keeping a whole household alive in a world where even a small mistake could mean death. Could you do it? Let's step into the frostbitten boots of a Viking wife, and see why most of us wouldn't last a single winter. Before we dive in, take a moment to settle in, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let this story carry you into the frozen world of Viking life. If you enjoy stories that blend forgotten history with vivid storytelling, don't forget to like the video. Leave a comment with your thoughts, or share your own theories on what life must have felt like back then. Would you have survived a single day in her place? We're curious to hear. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Whispers of History, where the past whispers you to sleep, one forgotten truth at a time. Your day begins long before the sun peeks over the Nordic horizon, in a world where survival hinges on constant labor and vigilance. As a Viking wife, your role is crucial and multifaceted. Far from the simplistic idea of a passive homemaker, you are the backbone of the household, managing resources, overseeing work, and maintaining family honor while your husband may be away on raids or trading voyages. Your responsibilities start at dawn with the tasks that keep the farm or settlement running, often under harsh climatic conditions that leave no room for idleness or error. The morning chores revolve around sustenance and shelter. Maintaining the hearth fire is vital not just for cooking, but for warmth and protection against the cold Scandinavian air. You fetch water from nearby wells or streams, often managing the delicate balance of supply without contaminating it. The preparation of food requires skill and endurance. Grinding grains into flour with primitive tools, baking dense rye bread, churning butter, and preserving meat or fish through smoking or salting for the long winters ahead. Clothing production and repair fall heavily into your domain. Spinning wool and flax into thread and weaving fabric by hand are laborious processes necessary for survival. Garments are patched and maintained meticulously since material resources are precious and trade limited. The weight of these tasks is compounded by your role in raising children, training them in domestic skills, and ensuring the continuation of the family line, a duty bound tightly with social expectations and honor. Beyond physical labor, managing the household economy requires shrewdness. You barter goods, oversee the allocation of goods and food, and may even handle small-scale trading to supplement your family's wealth. In the absence of your husband, you act as the de facto head of the household, making decisions that could affect the family's survival. This authority is recognized yet restrained within the strictures of Viking social norms, where inheritance laws and gender roles delineate power and responsibility. Your social standing depends heavily on maintaining the family's honor, which includes overseeing religious observances and community involvement. Viking wives actively participate in rituals, care for sacred spaces, and uphold customs that fortify group cohesion. Failure in any aspect of your role not only jeopardizes your family's well-being, but also exposes you to gossip, ostracism, or worse, social penalties in a tightly knit and often harsh society. Physical punishment for neglect or failure existed. And though exact norms varied by region and status, the Viking world was unforgiving. You learn quickly that the margin for error is thin. Your day will also likely include preparing your husband's weapons and clothes, treating minor injuries, and caring for elderly family members. All this unfolds before the community gathers for daily affairs or the long task of childbirth, itself an ordeal demanding resilience and knowledge in a time before modern medicine. In this dawn hour, you grasp the relentless physical nature of your life as a Viking wife, a role where labor, authority, and survival intertwine in a world without modern conveniences. A world where endurance defines existence. As the morning chores conclude and the sun rises higher over the rugged Nordic landscape, your role as a Viking wife deepens into the demanding management of livestock, food preservation, and the household economy. The success or failure of these tasks directly influenced your family's survival through long winters and uncertain seasons. Your responsibilities extended well beyond mere caretaking. You were an indispensable economic manager, strategist, and laborer in a society where resources were scarce and seasons unforgiving. Livestock were among the most valuable assets of any Viking household. As a wife, overseeing animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens was central. Your work included feeding, watering, grazing management, and protecting the animals from predators and harsh weather. Knowledge of animal behavior and ailments fell squarely on your shoulders. You had to recognize signs of disease or injury, administer rudimentary treatments, and coordinate with male family members for larger tasks like shearing or slaughtering. Seasonal cycles dictated intensive labor patterns. Spring and summer required you to organize pasture rotations and ensure adequate fodder for winter storage. Fall demanded butchering and preserving meat through salting, smoking, or drying. These methods were critical since fresh food became virtually unavailable for months. You were skilled in food preservation techniques, selecting optimal cuts, curing processes, and storage locations that kept spoilage at bay. Fish, another staple of the Viking diet, involved coordination with fishermen or family members who traveled to coastal or riverine areas. Salted or dried fish had to be managed carefully to supply the table during leaner times. You sometimes participated in fish processing, including gutting, drying, and packing. Ensuring that no resource was wasted was a dietary cornerstone, made mostly from rye, barley, or oats grains suited to the Nordic climate but coarser than wheat. Grinding grain with a hand mill was labor-intensive itself, and you oversaw the baking of dense loaves in stone or clay ovens, which required careful attention to maintain consistent heat. Bread was consumed daily, often supplemented with porridge or gruel, and was a key factor in nutrition and sustenance. Storage methods for food were inventive adaptations to the environment. You used underground pits, root cellars, or raised granaries, designed to keep provisions dry and safe from rodents or moisture. Proper storage was a critical skill, requiring constant vigilance to prevent spoilage or loss. Failure could mean famine or dependence on trade. Managing household supplies included not only food but also textiles, tools, and miscellaneous goods. You maintained inventories, repaired or replaced damaged items, and prepared surplus products for trade or barter. The Viking economy was largely self-sufficient but supplemented by participation in local markets or long-distance trade networks. Your ability to optimize resources and negotiate exchanges affected the prosperity of your household. Children were incorporated into work early, and as a Viking wife, you were responsible for training them in domestic skills: spinning, weaving, food preparation, animal care, and cultural customs. This education secured the transmission of survival knowledge vital to family and community continuity. Hygiene and sanitation, although constrained by available technology, were part of your duties to reduce disease and maintain health. You ensured cleanliness in living quarters, managed waste disposal, and practiced basic wound care within the household. The understanding of infection was primitive but practical measures, like smoke from fires and herbal remedies, were employed to protect your family. The social structure of Viking communities shaped and reinforced your responsibilities. Although Viking society granted women relatively more rights compared to contemporaneous European cultures, including property, ownership, and divorce, expectations of duty and obedience remained strong. Your labor, though vital, existed within a framework that prized male honor through raids and warfare, while female strength was expressed through domestic management and social mediation. Religious and cultural practices also intersected with your life. You maintained household shrines to Norse deities, performed rituals for fertility, protection, and prosperity, and observed seasonal festivals that intertwined with agricultural cycles. Your participation reinforced community bonds and spiritual well-being, binding the family to tradition and divine favor. The unpredictability of Viking life weighed heavily. Raids, warfare, and political alliances often meant your husband or male relatives were absent for extended periods, leaving you to manage crises alone. This included defending property from thieves, addressing disputes with neighbors, or coping with natural disasters. The resilience required was considerable. You were simultaneously caretaker, negotiator, and protector. Legal aspects also affected your daily existence. Icelandic sagas and Viking laws, such as those codified in the Gulathing and Frostathing assemblies, acknowledge women's rights to inherit and manage estates. However, these rights came with expectations to uphold familial and social honor. You were accountable not just for physical labor, but for sustaining your family's reputation and negotiating its place within the broader community. Despite the hard labor, your position offered certain spheres of influence. Women of status could wield power indirectly through managing estates or influencing family decisions. Widows, in particular, could assume leadership roles over household and landholdings until male heirs came of age. Your role was not interchangeable or insignificant. It was a cornerstone of Viking social and economic life. In sum, a Viking wife's day extended well beyond simple chores. It was a continuous balancing act of labor, management, education, and social diplomacy. The survival of the family depended on your capacity to navigate the demands of home, community, and tradition in a harsh and often dangerous landscape. As your morning fades into afternoon, your tasks shift toward the communal and social realms, where interactions with neighbors, kin, and local leaders become vital, beyond the physical work that shapes your day. Your life as a Viking wife unfolds deeply within the social fabric of your community. Viking society was tightly knit, and your actions and reputation resonated beyond your household, influencing alliances, honor, and survival. Your role in conflict resolution, kinship networks, and cultural continuity was instrumental, revealing that Viking women, through their social agency, were powerful threads in the communal tapestry. Neighbor relations were carefully maintained, and you often acted as the family's diplomat in managing daily interactions. Trade, borrowing, disputes, many were resolved informally through women's negotiation and mediation. The sharing of resources, tools, food surplus, and knowledge relied on trust you helped build and sustain. A quarrel left unresolved could spiral into feuds that endangered property and lives, so your capacity to maintain peace was essential. Kinship ties went beyond simple bloodlines. Marriages extended networks. Alliances reinforced social order, and mutual obligations crossed generations. As a wife, you actively participated in arranging marriages and fostering connections between families to strengthen your household's position. You guided children's socialization, ensuring that their behavior and skills reflected well on your lineage. Your influence was subtle but significant in preserving social cohesion. Women in Viking society organized and participated in communal events, festivals, religious ceremonies, seasonal rites that bound the community spiritually and culturally. You prepared feasts, maintained sacred spaces within your home, and participated in rituals to invoke prosperity and protection. Through these practices, you represented continuity with ancestral traditions and honored the gods. Your voice in domestic and social matters was recognized in specific contexts. In the absence of male leaders due to war or trade expeditions, you managed estate affairs and presided over smaller family meetings, making decisions about labor allocation, marriages, or dispute resolutions. Though male authority was paramount, women's practical expertise and leadership in these moments were respected and necessary. Religious observance offered women channels to express power and influence. Certain cult practices and goddess worship, maintained through matrilineal memory, reintegrated female authority alongside the officially patriarchal Norse pantheon. You upheld household shrines. Certain women served as seeresses or midwives with spiritual roles, blurring secular and sacred duties. A Viking wife's involvement in justice took practical forms when no formal legal system was present. Local assemblies or things were dominated by male aristocracy, but women could influence outcomes through testimony, advocacy, and social pressure. Widows and respected matriarchs carried weight in negotiation, arbitration, or penalty execution within the extended kin group. Honor was a pervasive cultural value, and as a wife, you carried significant responsibility to uphold your family's reputation. How your household appeared in terms of cleanliness, hospitality, and moral behavior influenced standing in the community. Your management extended to controlling gossip, supporting your husband's public image, and nurturing family pride through education and ritual. Widows often emerged as particularly influential figures, managing estates and families with full authority until heirs matured. This temporary autonomy was socially acknowledged and legally supported in many cases, granting widows fiscal and diplomatic power. Their ability to maintain family fortunes and alliances testified to the unique space Viking women occupied in the social order. Despite these spheres of influence, constraints endured. Patriarchal norms permeated gender expectations, limiting women's formal political power or public voice. Violence against women, while less documented, was present. Duels and feuds could threaten women indirectly, while accusations of impropriety risked social exclusion or worse. Yet, Viking law codes contained provisions for women's protection and redress, reflecting a complex balance. Education was primarily experiential and oral. You passed practical skills, textile production, animal husbandry, household management down through generations. Literacy was rare among women, though some noblewomen acquired rune knowledge or handled legal documents. Storytelling, myth, and oral history enriched female socialization, blending cultural memory with lived experience. Trade and travel exposed Viking women to wider networks of cultural exchange. Some accompanied husbands on voyages. Others managed households during journeys abroad, adapting to changing circumstances. Archaeological finds show imported luxury goods in Viking female graves, hinting at economic participation and transnational connections beyond the typical agrarian role. Your role also included managing health and healing. Knowledge of herbs, home remedies, and midwifery practices resided primarily with women. You attended to childbirth, injuries, and illnesses, providing immediate care and managing long-term well-being. This expertise contributed to household survival and highlighted women's indispensable practical knowledge. Among the many responsibilities, your relationship to children was central. You nurtured, educated, and disciplined, ensuring that cultural values and survival skills were transmitted effectively. The training of sons and daughters reflected social roles, fostering warrior skills, domestic expertise, or trade knowledge aligned with gender expectations. The overarching theme of your social role is adaptability. Viking society prized resilience and resourcefulness, and your status reflected ability as well as lineage. You negotiated shifting political landscapes and personal hardships with pragmatism and strength. balancing personal and communal demands, often invisibly but effectively. Understanding the social web of a Viking wife adds depth to the physical labors outlined earlier. The survival of your household depended on your ability to manage, not just resources, but relationships and reputations, weaving threads of power amid a harsh and dynamic world. Childbirth in Viking society was fraught with danger, secrecy, and profound social significance. As a Viking wife, your role extended beyond daily labor into the perilous realm of fertility, pregnancy, and motherhood, where survival was uncertain and the stakes immeasurably high. Medieval Scandinavian communities lacked the medical knowledge and technological means modern mothers rely on, leaving birth as a trial by fire, one that demanded resilience, knowledge, and the support of kin and midwives. Pregnancy itself was considered a vulnerable state, shaped by superstition, ritual, and practical caution. Illnesses or misfortunes during this time were often attributed to supernatural interference, curses, spirits, or divine displeasure. To navigate this dangerous phase, as a wife, you upheld or participated in protective customs, such as wearing amulets, reciting prayers, or adhering to dietary restrictions thought to safeguard mother and child. Such measures reflected a worldview where health and fate were entwined with the spiritual realm. Conceptions and births were subject to closely observed physical and social protocols. Fertility was prized, and producing heirs, especially sons, was critical for inheritance and the continuation of family honor. Female infertility, or child mortality, carried social stigma. Childless women, or those who lost multiple infants, risked marginalization or suspicion. Conversely, successful motherhood could elevate your status, confirming your worth and solidifying your position within family and community. The birth process itself was primarily female-centered but shaped by the household's power structures. Midwives, usually elder women with hands-on experience, served vital roles. Their expertise was invaluable in managing labor, positioning the infant, and applying traditional remedies or interventions. Unlike many contemporary societies, Viking midwifery was respected and essential, and midwives often held honorary positions within the community. Their knowledge combined empirical practice and inherited wisdom, including the use of herbs, massage, and manual assistance. Though midwives facilitated most births, male relatives' husbands, fathers, or brothers were usually excluded from the delivery chamber, reflecting a cultural boundary between masculine and feminine spheres. This separation reinforced the sanctity and privacy of birth, but it also meant that births occurred without the emergency support of a medically trained man. If complications arose, as a wife, you learned to call upon midwives quickly, or to prepare for a birth that might turn calamitous. Complications were common and deadly due to infection, hemorrhage, or obstructed labor. The absence of sterile techniques meant puerperal fever decimated many mothers. Unlike Semmelweis' later interventions, Viking-era Iceland and Scandinavia did not have germ theory, so postpartum infections were treated with herbal concoctions and ritualistic prayers rather than scientific methods. Without antibiotics or surgical intervention, many births ended in tragedy, especially first births or those with large infants. Stillbirth and neonatal mortality shaped the emotional landscape. Infants who died shortly after birth were mourned with a mix of grief and stoicism, their deaths wrapped in ritual to secure safe passage to the afterlife. Burial customs for infants were often simple but held communal significance, underscoring the importance of honoring life even when brief. As a mother, you faced cycles of hope and loss, facing the physical toll of repeated pregnancies. Amid high mortality rates, children's early years demanded intense care and vigilance. You managed feeding, usually breastfeeding, which was common and culturally valued, while supplementing with livestock milk or gruels when necessary. Immunity to diseases was low, and infectious illnesses commonly claimed young lives, making child-rearing a persistent source of anxiety and labor. As a Viking wife, your knowledge of herbal remedies, care techniques, and vigilant observation was crucial to safeguarding your children. Breastfeeding was not only a physical act but woven with cultural expectations and social symbolism. It established bonds and was believed to confer strength and protection. Wet nurses existed occasionally, particularly in wealthier families, but were less common than in other European societies. The physical demands of successive pregnancies and lactation often wore mothers down, but breastfeeding was integral to child survival and social expectations. You also served as the primary educator and moral guide for your children, teaching children practical skills complemented by imparting values of honor, loyalty, and bravery. Sons were prepared for roles as warriors or farmers, daughters for domestic responsibilities, and, if noble alliances through marriage, education was experiential, conducted within the household and community, without formal schooling. The success of this transmission was vital for family continuity. The social network around childbirth extended to the wider family and community. Births were often communal affairs, with female kin, neighbors, and friends supporting the mother through labor. sharing care for older children, and assisting postpartum recovery. These networks provided emotional sustenance in a time of high physical risk. Celebrations following a successful birth included feasting and rituals to welcome the new life and express collective joy. Despite the importance of fertility and childbirth, Viking women also contended with societal constraints and expectations that could limit their autonomy. The pressure to produce heirs, especially male heirs, influenced marriage decisions, personal choices, and social standing. Female reproductive health was often discussed in terms of lineage and property, aligning women's bodies with broader social and political agendas. In some sagas and records, midwives in women's reproductive roles are given noteworthy attention, highlighting their autonomous knowledge and social power in domestic and communal spheres. However, the documentation is uneven, reflecting a male-authored historical tradition that often overlooked or minimized female experience. Archaeological findings, such as grave goods and inscriptions, complement these narratives by illustrating the respect and importance accorded to women's reproductive roles. The health risks: 2 Viking wives extended beyond childbirth. Gynecological ailments, miscarriages, and infections were common and often fatal. Without formal medical practitioners, treatment was by home remedies, superstition, or luck. You learned to manage symptoms with herbal infusions, poultices, and rituals intended to restore balance, protection, or divine favor. The burden of such ailments was compounded by daily labor and limited rest. Cultural conceptions of motherhood linked love, duty, and spiritual values. Norse mythology and belief systems honored fertility goddesses like Frigg and Freya, reinforcing motherhood's sacred dimension. Rituals and offerings sought protection and blessings for mother and child, embedding family continuity within cosmic frameworks. This sacred aspect gave motherhood heightened social reverence but also weighty responsibility. In summary, childbirth and motherhood for a Viking wife were interwoven with risk, labor, social expectations, and spiritual meaning. You faced a physical and emotional gauntlet wrought by the limits of contemporary knowledge and the demands of Viking society. Success meant survival and continuation. Failure could lead to shame, loss, or marginalization. Your endurance under these conditions was both a testament to personal strength and a vital component of community survival, stepping beyond daily labor and childbirth. Your life as a Viking wife was deeply affected by the legal framework that governed marriage, property, and social standing. The Viking world was neither a matriarchy nor a straightforward patriarchy, but a complex social system blending male authority with significant female rights and responsibilities. Understanding the laws and customs that shaped your position reveals the power and constraints you navigated in everyday life. Marriage in Viking society was typically arranged, often as a strategic alliance supporting family honor, wealth, and political ties. You were expected not merely to bear children, but to integrate families and forge bonds that extended far beyond the household. Marriages could be formalized by contracts and ceremonies, but often were based on mutual consent and community recognition. With law assemblies, things sometimes overseeing agreements and disputes, this communal aspect gave you some leverage, as the consent of both parties mattered. Even if male heads of families held greater sway, property ownership was one crucial area where Viking women differed markedly from many of their medieval European contemporaries. You could inherit land, livestock, and valuables, especially as a widow or unmarried daughter. These rights were legally protected in early Scandinavian law codes, such as the Gulathan law, establishing procedures for inheritance, and protecting women's claims against male relatives or husbands. This meant you could maintain substantial economic independence, manage estates, and represent the family's interests. When men were absent, widowhood was a particularly significant status change for a Viking wife, often accompanied by increased authority and independence. Widows typically managed property and the household until male heirs reached maturity or remarried. Many surviving runestones and saga narratives highlight widows' roles as landholders, legal actors, and even negotiators in political matters. This legal recognition empowered you to act in the community as both family matriarch and economic agent. Divorce in Viking society was relatively accessible compared to other early medieval European cultures. You could initiate divorce for valid reasons such as adultery, neglect, or incompatibility, though the social consequences varied. Laws outlined specific grounds and procedures, emphasizing restitution and negotiation of property and child custody. This capacity for ending marriage gave you agency uncommon for women of the period. Although social pressures and family interests often discouraged separation, your legal protections extended to bodily autonomy to a degree. For example, laws protected women from assault and abuse, and you had rights to your own dowry and personal property, which husbands could not seize arbitrarily. However, the legal system remained patriarchal in practice, and male relatives or husbands exerted significant influence, especially among higher classes. Punishments for women who stepped outside social norms, whether through illicit relationships or defiance, could be severe, reinforcing gendered power structures. The concept of honor bound much of Viking social life, and as a wife, your behavior directly impacted your family's reputation. Laws regulated sexual conduct, with adultery by women often resulting in fines, exile, or other punishments. Men generally had more leeway, reflecting wider European double standards. But breaches could still damage alliances and social standing. Maintaining chastity before marriage and fidelity afterward was a cultural expectation, entwined with familial pride and social stability. The runic inscriptions and legal texts reveal nuanced views on women's social roles. While men dominated public legal assemblies, women occasionally appeared as plaintiffs, witnesses, or landowners asserting rights. Certain sagas depict women negotiating and even brokering peace between rival families or leading domestic legal affairs in their husband's absence. These examples illustrate that formal power structures coexisted with practical female influence. Religious customs also influenced your legal and social status. Norse pagan beliefs intertwined with law and governance, emphasizing sacred oaths, rituals, and property sanctity. After Christianization, church law layered additional expectations on marriage, inheritance, and morality, sometimes constraining previously accepted practices. Christian ideals promoted marital fidelity and female modesty, complicating existing rights and freedoms. However, remnants of Norse legal autonomy persisted, especially in rural areas. You could also influence the household through social networks extending beyond family ties. Female kinship groups, alliances formed through marriage, and communal resting places where women gathered for weaving, religious rites, or festivals strengthened women's social capital. These networks became sources of mutual aid, protection, and information exchange, enhancing your ability to negotiate in a society structured around honor and reciprocity. While Viking law codified many of these rights, practical enforcement could vary widely by region, status, and circumstance. Rural areas often followed customary law and local tradition. Urban centers might mix Norse with emerging feudal or Christian legal codes. Your experience as a Viking wife depended heavily on class, geography, and your family's standing within evolving power structures. Women of higher status could wield considerable influence, not just privately, but in public affairs, sometimes acting as regents, patrons, or diplomatic intermediaries. Manuscripts and saga literature commemorate such women for their wisdom, courage, and political acumen, evidence that the legal and social systems allowed for women's leadership under certain conditions. At the same time, normative expectations confined many wives to domestic life, subordinated to husbands and male elders. Female dissent or overreach risked social sanctions or legal repercussions. Balance between assertion and compliance was vital, often mastered through social skill, kinship support, and strategic alliances. Economic activities beyond farming, such as textile production, craftwork, and trade in local markets, were opportunities where your skills and labor translated into family wealth and status. Women often controlled household inventories, managed servants or slaves, and contributed significantly to Viking commerce. Your economic role reinforced your social and legal stake in the household's fortunes. Laws dealing with family property, children, or honor frequently involved women's testimonies and intervention, underscoring their integral position in Viking social organization. Even disputes involving violence or feuding might see women as peacemakers or negotiators, reinforcing community stability. In conclusion, the legal and social framework of Viking society shaped your life as a wife in intricate ways, rights, responsibilities, and authority uncommon in many contemporary cultures. While circumscribing your autonomy within honor-bound patriarchal norms, your success depended not only on labor and endurance, but on navigating laws, kinship ties, and social expectations with strategy and resilience. Far from a passive figure, you were an essential actor in the Viking world's survival and legacy. That the daily life of a Viking wife was deeply intertwined with the material world she crafted, maintained, and adorned. Textiles, household objects, and personal ornaments were not mere decorations or tools. They were expressions of your labor, status, identity, and connections to community and tradition. Understanding the material culture that surrounded you reveals how your work shaped both private and public spheres. Textile production was among the most time-consuming and essential tasks under your management. The entirety of your family's clothing, bedding, and domestic fabrics came from your weaving and spinning skills. Wool and linen were the common fibers, harvested and prepared through painstaking processes: shearing sheep, retting flax stalks, carding, spinning with a drop spindle or spinning wheel, then weaving on a warp-weighted loom. These tasks required endurance and expertise, passed down through generations and central to household economy. The colors and patterns woven into fabrics were laden with symbolism. Natural dyes derived from plants, berries, and minerals produced earth tones, reds, blues, and yellows that marked social rank and regional identity. For example, Bright dyes like madder root, red or woad blue were prized and could indicate higher status or wealth, especially when combined into patterned bands or brocades. You often controlled the display of colors and embroidery, subtleties that communicated your family's rank and connections. Clothing itself was multifunctional, protective against the harsh Scandinavian climate, a display of social standing, and a marker of gender and marital status. Women's garments typically included a linen underdress with a woolen overdress called a handrok or apron dress, held in place by brooches at the shoulders. These brooches, often made of bronze, silver, or even gold, ranged from simple to intricately decorated pieces shaped like animals or geometric motifs. Such adornments were both practical and symbolic, visible signs of your family's craft, wealth, or alliances. Jewelry played a similarly complex role. Neck rings, arm rings, beads, and pendants signified social status and marital connections. Bronze or silver arm rings could be inherited or gifted, and sometimes served as informal currency or dowry. You managed these precious items carefully, as they were portable assets that could ensure your survival or protect your children's futures in times of hardship. Beyond clothing and jewelry, your household contained numerous crafted items essential to daily life and ritual. Wooden bowls, spoons, and churns bore traces of your handiwork or oversight, while pottery and metalwork, often acquired via trade or crafted by local smiths, indicated your family's network and prosperity. You also arranged and cared for weapons and tools, managing their storage and maintenance, as they were the backbone of both livelihood and defense. Storage solutions within your home: wooden chests, woven baskets, and cloth sacks reflected domestic organization critical to survival. These housed textiles, preserved foods, and trade goods, requiring care to guard against humidity, pests, and theft. Your role extended to overseeing these caches, ensuring stock rotated properly through the seasons, and that nothing valuable was lost or spoiled. The Viking longhouse itself was a stage for your labor and social influence. You maintained the hearth, an essential feature for cooking, heating and light balancing, firewood supply and cleanliness. Managing smoke flow through vents or holes in the roof necessitated practical knowledge to avoid sickness or smoke damage. The longhouse's spatial divisions areas for food preparation, sleeping, storage, and crafts depended on your coordination to serve familial and communal needs efficiently. Daily rituals and feasting also centered on your preparation and presentation. Banquets, often tied to seasonal cycles or religious observances, showcased your skill in food preparation and hospitality. Preparing smoked fish, salted meats, preserved fruit, and baked goods required coordination and resourcefulness. These events reinforced family honor and alliances, with your role as hostess vital to the household's social currency. Certain domestic artifacts reflected spiritual and ritual significance. You maintained small household shrines dedicated to Norse gods and ancestors, with carved wooden idols or amulets. These sacred spaces required care. Offerings of mead, food, or crafted goods were made to invoke protection or blessings. Your knowledge of ritual practices, spoken prayers, and seasonal ceremonies affirmed your family's piety and connection to cosmic order. The archaeological record underscores your labor's significance. Textiles recovered from burial sites reveal sophisticated weaving techniques and use of imported materials, indicating that your skill extended beyond subsistence. Jewelry and engraved goods buried with Viking women speak to status and identity, confirming that material culture was central to memory and social standing in your society. Textile production was also a communal activity that tied you to networks. Beyond your household, you engaged in exchanges of cloth, knowledge, and goods with neighbors and kin, reinforcing alliances and social cohesion. Guild-like associations of women skilled in spinning and weaving may have existed, fostering shared learning and mutual support. Your skills could also have economic impact beyond the household. Viking trade networks spread across Europe, the Mediterranean, and Asia, and you might have contributed goods for export or exchange. Woolen cloth, for example, was a valuable trade commodity, linking your labor to sprawling commercial routes. This economic agency, while often obscured by male-dominated narratives, was a crucial dimension of your social influence. The symbolism embedded in your material culture extended to notions of gender and power. Textiles and personal ornaments articulated ideas of femininity tied to craft, fertility, and social order. Women who controlled these domains could assert moral authority and social prestige within their communities while navigating patriarchal frameworks. Your work was a form of power, weaving social fabric as much as cloth. Clothing and objects also had roles in marking life transitions. Wedding garments, mourning attire, and ceremonial dress involved particular colors, patterns, or adornments, signaling marital status, grief, or religious affiliation. Through your choices and craftsmanship, you mediated these liminal moments, situating family members within cultural and spiritual continuities. In sum, the physical artifacts and material culture of your life as a Viking wife were inseparable from your social position and identity. Every spindle turned, every thread woven, every brooch fastened was a stitch in the complex weave of survival, community, and honor. Your hands crafted not only the essentials of daily life, but the symbols that conveyed your family's place. In the Viking world, living as a Viking wife meant confronting health challenges without the benefit of modern medicine, hospitals, or even systematic healthcare. Your survival frequently depended on practical knowledge passed down orally through generations, combined with herbal remedies, ritual protection, and physical endurance. While formal medical practitioners, as we know them, were largely absent, your role as healer within the household and community was vital, shaping both everyday well-being and responses to illness or injury. Health in Viking society was understood through a combination of empirical observation, folk wisdom, and spiritual beliefs. Illnesses ranged from infectious diseases that spread seasonally, to injuries sustained in daily labor, complications of childbirth, and chronic conditions exacerbated by harsh living conditions. You learned to recognize symptoms and to distinguish between ailments that could be treated with herbs and rest, and those that required more drastic, sometimes fatal measures. Herbal medicine formed the backbone of treatment. You gathered plants such as yarrow, elderflower, nettle, and comfrey, each prized for properties like reducing inflammation, promoting wound healing, or easing pain. Herbal infusions and poultices were prepared, carefully dried in the sun, crushed, and steeped over fire, and applied with skill to cuts, bruises, or digestive complaints. Some remedies were consumed as teas, others applied externally. This pharmacopoeia was extensive, yet limited, requiring both intuition and experience to avoid toxicity. Childbirth, as explored in Part 4, presented particular risks, and your knowledge as a midwife was not only practical but indispensable. You learned to assist deliveries, manage complications when possible, and comfort women through the ordeal. Herbal preparations like red raspberry leaf tea to tone the uterus, or dill seeds to ease colic in infants, were part of your toolkit. However, the absence of antiseptic knowledge meant infections like puerperal fever took many lives despite your care. Infections and epidemics posed a constant threat. Smallpox, scurvy, respiratory ailments, and parasites afflicting both humans and livestock could decimate families and communities. Treatments for infectious diseases were largely palliative: rest, warmth, and herbal remedies aimed at reducing symptoms rather than curing the underlying causes, which remained unknown. You also employed traditional cleansing rituals, smoke from juniper, or thyme burned in the household to purify spaces and ward off evil spirits believed to carry illness. Nutrition was both a cause and a treatment for poor health. Seasonal scarcity and limited food diversity made maintaining strength difficult. Supplementing diets with wild greens, berries, and fish eggs was common, especially in lean months. You understood the importance of fresh water and clean food preparation to prevent disease. Though these were hard to guarantee, experience taught you that weakened bodies were more susceptible to infection and complications during childbirth. Healing was a social affair as much as a physical one. Kinship networks supported the sick with food, care, and companionship. Women in particular formed circles of mutual assistance, sharing remedies, prayers, and emotional support. This communal care was essential in a world where formal healthcare systems were absent. The social stigma of certain illnesses, however, could isolate affected individuals, particularly those with contagious or mental afflictions. Beyond herbs, spiritual healing was central. You maintained household altars for offerings to gods like Thor, Freya, or healing deities such as Ire, invoking divine protection. Ritual prayers, incantations, and charms were common adjuncts to physical remedies. Amulets worn on the body or hung in the home served as talismans against disease and misfortune. These practices reflected a worldview where health was inseparable from cosmic harmony and the favor of the supernatural. Injuries were treated with pragmatism. Cuts, bruises, broken bones, and burns were common due to domestic work, farming, or occasional violence. You applied splints fashioned from wood, animal sinew, or cloth for fractures, and used salves made from melted animal fats and herbs to soothe wounds and prevent infection. Pain management was rudimentary, often relying on alcohol or opium. Derivatives like poppy seeds, Zandurol encompassed, soothing both body and spirit during recovery. Mental health was poorly understood but not ignored. Conditions ranging from grief and depression to stress or cognitive impairment were explained through spiritual disturbance, curses, or imbalance of humors, an ancient medical concept still influential. Healing involved a mix of herbal sedatives, rest, and sometimes rituals to expel evil influences. You were likely the first, if not the only, provider of comfort to those suffering mental distress. Your knowledge as a healer was balanced precariously with societal norms and fears. Accusations of witchcraft or sorcery could arise if a woman's healing practices seemed too secretive, too effective, or were associated with unexplained phenomena. You had to navigate community trust carefully, employing healing within accepted cultural frameworks. This maintained your place in the social order and protected you and your family from suspicion or violence. Access to specialized medical knowledge was largely absent outside major settlements. Travelers, traders, or skalds sometimes brought news of distant remedies or innovations, but these filtered slowly into rural areas. The intermingling of Norse and Christian beliefs during Viking expansion introduced new elements to healing practices, including the Christian saints' intercession for health, and the use of church-sanctioned charms, replacing older pagan talismans. Your workload included preventive care monitoring family members, ensuring cleanliness, recognizing early signs of illness, and managing diet and activity to promote robustness. Prophylactic rituals before important events, such as voyages or military campaigns, were common, intended to shield your household from misfortune. The success of these efforts was often ascribed to your skill and piety, reinforcing your status, but also burdening you with responsibility for collective well-being. Despite your expertise, many illnesses were beyond remedy. Epidemics such as plague or influenza struck with devastating speed and lethality, overwhelming individual and community capacities to cope. The grief and stress of losing family members while maintaining daily survival tasks were an unspoken hardship of your life as a Viking wife. Burial rites, undertaken with care and often solemnity, were among your final duties for loved ones. The fragility of life heightened the importance of resilience, both physical and emotional. You balanced hope and pragmatism, preparing for childbirth, managing household crises, and preserving the family legacy amid uncertainty. Your role required adaptability as you faced environmental changes, warfare, and social upheaval, all factors influencing health and survival in the Viking Age. In summary, the health and medical care available to you as a Viking wife were an intricate blend of empirical knowledge, herbalism, ritual practice, and communal support. Lacking formal institutions, your role as healer was essential, demanding continual learning, resourcefulness, and negotiation of cultural beliefs. Your survival and that of your family depended on your ability to care for body and spirit in a world where both were constantly under threat. Life for a Viking wife was punctuated by long periods when your husband was away on raids, trading voyages, or at war. Contrary to any notions of passive passivity, you were the de facto head of household during these absences, bearing the heavy burden of governance, economic stewardship, security, and social diplomacy. Your resilience and leadership were crucial to family survival and prosperity in a volatile, often violent world. When he departed, the mantle of authority was placed squarely on your shoulders. Far from a caretaker role limited to chores, you managed agricultural schedules, labor organization, and resource distribution, making decisions that might affect the family's food supply for months or years. You handled contracts, arranged labor exchanges with neighbors, and traded surplus goods, all vital tasks to maintain and grow the family's wealth. Your authority extended to dispute resolution within your household and immediate community. If conflicts arose, be it over land boundaries, debts, or interpersonal disputes, you arbitrated, negotiated, and enforced social norms. You drew upon kinship networks and customary law, intervening firmly yet judiciously to preserve peace and honor. Your diplomacy could prevent feuds that, in Viking society, could easily escalate into bloodshed. Managing the household's defenses was another daunting responsibility. While major physical protection might lie with male kin or hired warriors, you organized watch schedules, safeguarded valuables, and maintained weaponry. When threats arose, whether from rival clans, bandits, or enemy raids, your nerve and strategy in rallying defenders or evacuating family members could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Communication, in your husband's absence, was challenging but central to maintaining family cohesion and alliances. Messages were exchanged via traveling merchants, visiting kin, or through scouts, poets, storytellers who doubled as news bearers. You carefully curated the family's reputation in letters or oral reports, reinforcing ties that sustained political leverage and social standing. The psychological demands of prolonged separation were immense. You bore the anxiety of uncertain outcomes, fears for your husband's safety, and the emotional burden of single parenthood. Your resilience was wedded to faith, ritual, and community support. Regular prayers, offerings at shrines, and participation in communal festivals provided spiritual solace, reinforcing hope and social bonds critical to endurance. Widows in Viking society exemplified the apex of female agency. Upon your husband's death, you received legal and social recognition as the family leader, managing estates and arranging marriages or betrothals for your children. Widowed women wielded substantial economic power and often brokered peace or negotiated on behalf of extended kin. This autonomy was respected, albeit circumscribed by the expectation to remarry or align with male protectors when expedient. Household management, during absence or widowhood, encompassed everything from mill operation and livestock management to overseeing slaves or thralls. You dictated daily routines, supervised servants, and ensured continuous production of textiles and foodstuffs. Your ability to maintain order amidst uncertainty upheld the family's honor and stability. The absence of modern communication meant managing tangible tokens of presence and authority. You might wield your husband's signet ring or weapon as symbols of his delegated authority. Your commands carried weight by proxy, upheld by traditions recognizing women's stewardship. In such a system, your status transcended domestic boundaries into realms of quasi-political power. Social expectations prescribed strict codes of behavior during these times. You were to maintain fidelity, manage household affairs discreetly, and represent family interests publicly. Rumors or accusations could damage the family's standing severely. Yet historical records indicate many women exercised significant discretion and influence, deftly balancing obedience with practical autonomy. Your relationships with kin during these periods were vital. You relied on sisters, mothers, and female relatives for counsel, labor support, and emotional sustenance. These networks formed an extended safety net, reinforcing solidarity and collective resilience. Shared rituals, gatherings, and mutual aid were woven into the fabric of these relationships, enhancing communal stability and continuity. You also managed the education and upbringing of children, instilling values of honor, courage, and loyalty in sons, and cultivating skills and social knowledge in daughters. Your influence shaped future generations, nurturing heirs and wives, who would navigate the same demands and constraints. In some sagas and archaeological findings, Viking women are portrayed as decisive leaders who could influence or even direct clan politics during male absences or deaths. While male leadership dominated, women's roles in diplomacy, alliance building, and estate control were indispensable. This duality reflects a society where gender roles were complex and contingent on circumstance. In times of crisis such as siege, famine, or epidemic, your leadership was further tested. Historical evidence suggests that Viking women organized communal defenses, rationed resources, and maintained morale. Their participation in grave affairs reflects that strength emerged from necessity as much as from social status. Despite the latitude you wielded, these responsibilities exacted physical and emotional tolls. You navigated the harshness of Nordic winters, the precariousness of food stores, and the constant threat of violence with limited external support. Your endurance and leadership were often unsung, obscured by male-focused sagas, yet foundational to societal survival. Your day, stretched by the demands of care and governance during absence, was punctuated by moments of community interaction, market exchanges, religious observance, social gatherings where news and alliances were shared. These engagements reaffirmed your role as both domestic manager and social actor, essential to the family's place in a wider world. The honor of your family rested largely on your stewardship during these times. Failures in management, scandal, or dishonor could lead to loss of standing or worse consequences. The stakes were existential. You learned to navigate competing demands with prudence, patience, and strength. In conclusion, Viking wives, in periods of spousal absence, were neither idle nor powerless. They governed households and estates, maintained alliances and peace, managed crises, and shaped the social fabric. Your authority, though often indirect and contingent, was vital in sustaining Viking families and communities through the uncertainties of an era defined by travel, conflict, and survival. Religion permeated every aspect of Viking life, weaving spiritual meaning through daily tasks, community relations, and personal identity. As a Viking wife, your role as a preserver and mediator of religious traditions was as vital as your work in the household economy or social web. Whether maintaining the ancient Norse beliefs or navigating the growing influence of Christianity, faith shaped your worldview and offered frameworks for resilience amid the uncertainties of the Viking Age. At the heart of your spiritual duty was the hearth, the physical and symbolic center of family life. The hearth was the sacred nexus where the ancestral spirits and gods were honored. Fires were kept burning for protection and prosperity, and offerings were made. Maintaining the hearth fire was not just practical, it carried profound religious significance. Extinguishing the hearth fire was considered a dire omen, inviting misfortune or spiritual dissolution, so your attentiveness to its flame reflected your household's vitality and connection to the divine. You facilitated household rituals, smoking meat and herbs over the fire not only preserved food but also purified the space, warding off malevolent spirits. Daily sacrifices of food or drink might be made to household deities such as the protective spirits known as land. These rituals were subtle, often private affairs, but they sustained the family's bond with the unseen forces that governed fate. Your religious life was primarily rooted in the Norse pantheon, the pantheon of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freyr, associated with elements of nature, war, fertility, and prosperity. You observed seasonal festivals such as Yule, the solstices, and the Great Midsummer Feast, which punctuated your year with communal celebrations, prayers, and offerings. These rites reaffirmed community cohesion and ensured the favor of the divine forces critical for survival in a harsh environment. Household shrines, often simple wooden carvings or runic inscriptions, dotted the domestic space. You kept these sacred objects clean, made offerings of mead or food, and invoked the deities for blessings on crops, livestock, family health, and protection from enemies. The role of women in maintaining these shrines was both spiritual and political, as religious legitimacy often underpinned social authority. Your role as a ritual specialist was tacit but pivotal. You performed rites linked to fertility, childbirth, and death, guiding your family through liminal states. Midwives, often women like yourself, provided ritual knowledge that invoked goddesses associated with childbirth like Frigg or Hel, combining practical care with spiritual safeguarding. You chanted prayers, recited traditional incantations, and prepared sacred oils or waters believed to ward off evil. From the 10th century onward, Christianity gained ground in Viking territories, introduced through trade, conquest, and missionary efforts. This religious transformation brought marked shifts in belief and ritual that affected you deeply. Conversion was often gradual and complex, emblematized by the coexistence and overlap of pagan and Christian practices in your community. You experienced the tension between the old and new faiths firsthand. Some household members might cling to traditional gods and customs, while others openly embraced Christian sacraments and priests. Your role grew more complicated as you balanced these competing loyalties, perhaps maintaining a Norse shrine in a corner while preparing children for baptism or navigating Christian marriage rites. This bicultural spiritual existence demanded flexibility and negotiation. Christianity introduced centralized religious authority, new moral codes, and new models for gender and social order. The emphasis on monogamy, chastity, and obedience introduced stricter behavioral expectations for women. The church promoted the ideal of the virtuous Christian wife and mother as submissive, modest, and pious. Ideals you were expected to embody publicly even as you navigated practical realities less amenable to such constraints. Nonetheless, Christianity also offered new forms of solace and social inclusion. The church provided charity, healing prayers, and community rituals around birth, death, and marriage. You participated in Mass, observed liturgical calendars, and celebrated Christian holidays like Easter and Christmas, adapting your rhythms to this new spiritual order. Religious festivals became hybrid occasions, blending Christian liturgy with older folk customs in a process of cultural syncretism. Despite the patriarchal structure of both Norse and Christian institutions, you exercised notable spiritual agency. Inscribed stones and saga accounts recount powerful female figures acting as Cirrus's Velvus or spiritual intermediaries, roles that living Viking wives sometimes channeled in domestic or communal contexts. Your knowledge of prophecy, healing, and ritual positioned you as a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. Christianity's rise did not entirely displace these roles. Women became nuns, abbesses, and mystics within the church, gaining spiritual authority and sometimes political influence. You might have relatives who embraced monastic life or served as anchoresses, representing an ascetic alternative to worldly duties. Within such religious communities, women's intellectual and spiritual contributions, including manuscript production and theological discourse, elevated their social standing. Personal piety flourished in diverse forms. You might engage in private prayer, meditation, and the use of devotional objects like rosaries, crosses, or relics. Popular Christian beliefs in saints, intercession, miracles, and purgatory influenced your understanding of suffering and hope. These practices provided comfort in illness, protection from hardship, and a language to express the spiritual dimensions of love and family. Your spiritual duties extended to overseeing rites of passage, baptism, confirmation, marriage, and funeral. These rituals bound your family into the community's spiritual and social fabric. Baptism initiated children into the Christian faith, requiring your coordination with clergy and preparation of gifts or feasts. Marriage ceremonies combined Christian vows and social contracts, often overseen by both church and kin. Funerary rites were critical in navigating death's uncertainty. You aided in preparing the deceased, organizing wakes, and conducting prayers for the soul's journey. Beliefs in afterlife and judgment-shaped practices around burial location, grave goods, and memorial services. You ensured the dead were honored, to secure familial blessings and prevent haunting or spiritual unrest. The blend of pagan and Christian beliefs permeated everyday activities. You might invoke Christian prayers before meals, while offering small charms to Vider. Harvesting or healing rituals might include recitation of psalms alongside ancient invocations. This syncretism reflects your pragmatic spirituality focused on survival, prosperity, and continuity, rather than doctrinal purity. Your resilience amid religious changes embodied a practical spirituality. Understanding how to negotiate new beliefs without alienating kin or community was vital. You balanced reverence with realism, preserving traditions while adopting new practices that promised protection or favor. In summary, your spiritual life as a Viking wife was a layered, dynamic blending of ancient Nordic religious traditions and encroaching Christian faith. You were a guardian of sacred hearth and ritual, a mediator of religious change, and an agent of spiritual resilience. Your faith shaped your identity, informed your social role, and provided frameworks for hope amid uncertainty. As your day as a Viking wife draws to a close, the story of your life resonates far beyond the boundaries of your longhouse or village. Your resilience, skills, and social roles echo through history, not just in dusty manuscripts or sagas, but in tangible cultural legacies that shaped the Nordic world and beyond. Understanding how the Viking wife's experience influenced successive generations reveals the profound strength and adaptability woven into your identity. The Viking Age officially ended around the early 11th century, yet the imprint of Viking women remained. Their responsibilities in household management, estate stewardship, and social mediation laid foundations for Nordic societal structures well into the medieval era and beyond. The rights Viking women held ownership, divorce, legal agency, while gradually constrained under evolving Christianized law, persisted comparatively longer than in other European regions, providing a basis for ongoing female influence. Archaeological discoveries continue to shed light on these women's lives. Grave goods, clothing remnants, and settlement patterns reveal that Viking wives were active economic agents. They controlled wealth, passed down traditions, and maintained social order. Recent interpretations of runestones, once thought to commemorate only male achievements, increasingly recognize women's roles as landowners, warriors, and community leaders. Confirming the saga's hints about female agency, Viking wives have been immortalized partially through saga literature, folklore, and oral tradition. These narratives often emphasize strength, wisdom, and loyalty, reflecting societal ideals. Characters like Lagertha, the warrior wife, or Juyurin, Jukadota, the clever matriarch, symbolize the complex roles women played beyond mere homemaking. Though literature blends fact and fiction, it reflects cultural memory valuing female perseverance. Over time, these stories influenced Nordic identity, gender norms, and folklore. The image of the Viking wife as both caretaker and protector resonates in contemporary Scandinavian art, literature, and national narratives, often romanticized but rooted in historical truths of endurance and agency. These portrayals both celebrate and mythologize what it meant to be a woman in a demanding, patriarchal, yet flexible society. The Viking wife's legacy also lies in the ways her roles evolved under the pressures of Christianity, feudalism, and emerging nation-states. While restrictions increase, especially concerning marriage, sexual conduct, and property rights, the core of women's responsibilities remain domestic and social leadership. In rural Scandinavia, women often continued to manage farms and villages during male absences caused by warfare or seasonal migration, reflecting continuity with Viking Age customs. Notably, some Viking principles regarding women's rights influenced later Nordic legal codes, which historically granted women more autonomy than in many other European countries. The concept of inherited property and divorce rights, pioneered in Norse law, provided a partial model for later reforms. This progressive attitude toward women's legal status is credited, in part, to the social structure shaped during Viking times. In the realm of material culture, the legacy of Viking wives includes agricultural and domestic innovations that shaped subsequent Northern European economies. Their expertise in animal husbandry, textile production, and food preservation contributed to more sustainable household economies. Techniques honed in challenging environments such as preserving food through smoking or salting spread with Viking migrations and trade, integrating into broader medieval European practices. Textile arts, controlled and developed by Viking women, not only served daily needs but became important commercial commodities, with woven cloths traded across vast distances. This economic contribution elevated women's status within households and communities as producers of valuable goods, influencing market dynamics. Despite their importance, Viking wives' lives have often been overshadowed by the martial exploits of men. History's focus on warfare and exploration relegated women's everyday labors and leadership to the margins. Only recently have historians and archaeologists begun to recover the full scope of their contributions, challenging stereotypes of passive or subservient Viking women. The recognition of female warriors in burial sites initially sparked debate, but now strengthens the understanding that Viking women could embody multiple roles simultaneously: nurturers, managers, and combatants, when necessary. Their adaptability to family and community needs reflects a resilience that was vital in a world defined by uncertainty and change. Today, Viking heritage holds significant cultural currency across Scandinavia and the wider world. Women's roles in Viking society are reinterpreted in popular media, history, education, and feminist discourse. celebrating their strength and agency. Their legacies inspire contemporary conversations about gender roles, empowerment, and historical perspectives on women's contributions. Museums and heritage sites now highlight women's artifacts and stories, fostering a more balanced picture of Viking life. Through exhibitions featuring textile production tools, personal jewelry, household implements, and rune inscriptions, the everyday yet extraordinary lives of Viking wives gain visibility, honoring their enduring impact. The Viking Wife's Day, filled with labor, leadership, and complex social negotiations, was a testament to human endurance and adaptability. Her story challenges simplistic notions of medieval womanhood and invites appreciation of the nuanced roles women played in shaping Nordic societies. Her legacy, woven through law, culture, economy, and memory, continues to shape understandings of identity and gender in Northern Europe. Reflecting on her life encourages a richer historical narrative, acknowledging the vital roles women have always played, often unnoticed, in the survival and flourishing of communities.